All right. So, hi, everybody, and welcome to this month's Give Live. I'm Camber, and I work in the marketing department for Give WP, a stellar WP brand. And today we'll be discussing privacy policy compliance for nonprofits with Termageddon. Termageddon can help nonprofits protect themselves and their donors by generating privacy policies, terms of service, and more that automatically update as laws change. And today we have Donata and Hans Skillerud from Termageddon with us. Donata is a licensed attorney and certified information privacy professional, as well as the chair of the Chicago Bar Association's Privacy and Cybersecurity Committee. She's also a member of the American Bar Association's Science and Technology Council and a member of the ABA's Cybersecurity Legal Task Force. She serves as the president of Termageddon and is responsible for architecting the legal flows that make up its website policy generators. Hans oversees partnerships and business development for Termageddon. An educator at heart, Hans uses every chance he gets to educate website owners about the importance of website policies. Prior to Termageddon, Hans ran a 12-person web design agency in downtown Chicago for 7 years before selling it in 2019 to focus on Termageddon exclusively. So, welcome to you both. We're so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. Yeah, we're very excited to be here. And if you caught that, that was our cat Blairgnog, who is staring at me, very upset right now that I didn't let her come in front of the camera. But
Oh,
So
I'm sure
already,
nobody.
we've already ruined this podcast by bringing
No. No, I doubt anybody would complain. I doubt anyone would complain.
Well, that's
So
good to
we
hear because they'll probably show up again.
Yeah.
So
well, good. Bring them on camera. Everyone will say hi. It'll be a jolly good time.
sounds great.
So we covered your kind of professional background. I would love to just quickly know a little bit more about you personally, things that you enjoy, that kind of thing.
sure. So if you can't tell from our last names, we are married. And we live in Chicago. And I guess in my free time right now, my current project is repainting our kitchen cabinets.
You're doing a great job.
So if anybody has any tips on how to unruin a kitchen, let me know.
I'm Hans, and I'm better known these days as Donata's husband. So, but
As it should
yeah, she's smart. Yeah, very smart woman. So, but yeah, in my free time, I like to work on woodworking projects. I love working on our garden. I work with Arduinos. I build little features with my little Arduino set. Yeah, nerd. Thank you. So yeah, that's kind of like what I like to do, projects on the side.
Yeah.
So
Well, that sounds like a lot of fun. Though, Donata, you and I might have to talk off camera sometime about the kitchen project because I also am desperately trying to update my kitchen, and I just don't even know where to start. So it's a big project.
A lot of super glue and a lot of mistakes that you
Swear
fix with
words.
super glue.
No, but sometimes I look at my kitchen and I'm like, it can't get worse.
That's what I thought too. So I was like, all right, I'm just gonna do this. So hopefully it turns out better. I don't know.
it's
We'll
looking
see.
better.
Yeah.
Definitely.
All right. Well, that's very good. One quick note before we get started to anybody that's watching. As we go through the discussion, you'll see these little text boxes pop up in the bottom lower third of the screen, and they will have the topic that we're talking about as well as a go link. So if there's more information that you want to learn that we don't cover, you can just click on those links and go right there, and that should be good to go. So we're going to jump in. So the first things I want to talk about is there are 6 new privacy laws taking effect this year. So I'm really curious about what is the most crucial information that we need to know about these new laws.
Yeah. So before we start, I did want to note that we're not providing legal advice today. If you are looking for legal advice, recommend talking to your attorney about that. Really, when it comes to privacy laws, I think the most important thing to know is that privacy laws don't really care where you're located. So if you're located in Illinois, that does not mean that California's laws, for example, don't apply to you. So it's all about, where you do business, where your donors are, where your members are, where you're accepting donations from, or if part of a donation somebody receives an item, where those items are shipped, things like that. And I think for nonprofits, especially, it's really important to understand that not all privacy laws apply to nonprofits, but there are privacy laws that do apply to nonprofits. So, for example, of the 6 new privacy laws, Quebec Bill 64, it does apply to nonprofits. Meanwhile, PIPETA, which is Canada's federal privacy law, applies to for-profit entities only. So out of the 6 new privacy laws in 2023, nonprofits should look at all of them, but pay particular attention to Quebec's bill, which goes into effect later this year.
And just to take a quick step back and just talk about, privacy laws, and I'm sure everyone listening right now couldn't be more excited at the idea of talking about privacy policies just in general.
I'm excited.
We're the two excited people. But I think it's important to understand that people's names, their email addresses, their phone numbers, their IP addresses, anything that can be used to identify an individual is what's called personal information. And that's what these privacy laws are out to protect and regulate. So if your website is collecting that personal information, that's when the light bulb should go off, which is, maybe I do need a privacy policy that provides the exact disclosures required under the laws that specifically apply to me. So
right. So when we're talking about nonprofits, we're talking about the kind of information that they're collecting on donation forms, or if they sign up for a newsletter, or
right.
really any kind of that information. Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And privacy laws start applying the moment you collect that information. So you don't need to use it, you don't need to share it, you don't need to sell it. It's the moment that you collect that personal information, that's when privacy laws can start applying to you.
Right. And I think we're going to get into some of that later when we talk a little bit more about like sharing and collecting data. And even if you don't actually share data with anyone and it's internal data, it's still a requirement to protect the privacy of that data and those people. So exactly. We'll definitely dig into that a little bit. So I know that you mentioned that there's one law that directly applies to nonprofits. Taking that into account with the new law and then existing laws, how can nonprofits decipher when privacy laws apply to them and then how to be in compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So Donata nailed it with saying hey, I might be a nonprofit based in Illinois, but if I'm getting website traffic, collecting the personal information from people in different areas, I need to find out if I need to comply with those privacy laws. So that is one of the biggest messages we like to share with people, which is that privacy laws don't care about where you're located, and they each have their own specific disclosure requirements. So you as a website owner have to first identify the laws that apply to you. And I think there's 2 good ways of going about this. So number one is asking your attorney if they, write privacy policies and what their process is to drafting a privacy policy. And what you'll want to keep in mind is if they're talking about having to first figure out what laws apply, because only then can you identify the disclosures you're required to make. The alternative to an attorney, which obviously hiring an attorney is the best route, but the alternative would be to use a generator like Termageddon, which we represent. So obviously we're a little bit biased in our opinion, but a good generator will help you identify the laws that you need to make disclosures for. So those are the 2 main ways I think any website owner can go about getting to the identification point of figuring out what laws apply to them, is to use a generator or an attorney. There is obviously the other route of reviewing every single privacy law as well, although that could be thousands of pages for quite a bit of work.
And maybe if I can shed light on how we actually do it behind the scenes. So each privacy law has a set of definitions at the beginning. And one of the things that it defines is business or covered entity. And it will say whether somebody needs to be a commercial entity or non-commercial entity. Mm-hmm. So if it is saying a commercial entity, usually that means that that's only for profit businesses. If it says commercial and non-commercial, that usually means for-profit and non-profit. And those definitions will also have a list of exemptions from the covered entity or from the definition of business. And a lot of times it will say nonprofits are exempt. But from the existing privacy laws, for example, GDPR, European Union's privacy law, and United Kingdom's Data Protection Act, both of those apply to nonprofits because they do not exempt nonprofits. Versus Quebec Bill 64 specifically says that nonprofits need to comply. So that's usually how we do it behind the scenes. Now, for nonprofits as well, you may still be subject to privacy laws that apply to for-profit entities if you're engaging in a commercial activity. So, for example, let's say you have a list of donors and you decide to sell that list of donors, or you sell the list of event attendees, something like that. That would be considered a commercial entity, which could still subject you to those privacy laws, even though you are a nonprofit.
Right. So even if you have a nonprofit that maybe they sell merch, like you have Charity Water sells merch, that's a commercial exercise. And so then they would need to be looking into commercial like privacy policy laws.
Exactly.
Yep.
Great to know. I have so many questions, but I feel like I'll wait to see if somebody else asks them in the Q&A session. So I don't think I thought I was going to be so curious about privacy policy, but here we are. So
It's a rabbit hole. I mean, it's a hole people can drop into. And I will
I've
note,
dropped into it for like over 5 years
yeah,
now.
that's true.
for
That's
sure.
true. Never left.
Yeah.
I think just for anyone listening, if you are sitting there with a question you want to ask, please ask, because typically someone will ask a question and then we'll get a good answer and then the questions start flowing in. So anyone listening, feel free to ask any questions. Hopefully we can field them for you today.
Yeah, absolutely. So considering like all the different laws and all the different disclosures that you need to take into consideration, what are the necessary disclosures that should be included in every privacy policy?
So generally, what a privacy policy is in general is an explanation of your privacy practices. So what personal information you're collecting, what you're doing with that information, and who you're sharing it with, if anyone. That's the basis of most privacy policies, but each privacy law has its own set of disclosures that it requires privacy policies to make. And that's why it's really important to first figure out what privacy laws apply to you, because without doing that, you're not going to be able to get a compliant privacy policy because you're not going to have all of the disclosures required. So each privacy law literally has a list of the disclosures that you need to have, and each one of them has very, very different requirements. So for example, some privacy laws require you to state why you're sharing personal information with a particular party, or why you're selling that information, or why, or
Why you're sharing it.
Yeah, why you're sharing it, why your website, or how your website responds to do not track signals. What privacy rights are you offering to consumers and how consumers can exercise those privacy rights. And I think that kind of brings us into something that's very, very popular, unfortunately, is using templates. So we see a lot of businesses take templates online that they found and then kind of adapt them to their own business. And that's a really, really big problem because the templates don't start off by figuring out what disclosures you actually need. So they don't have all the disclosures that you need. And then you have to go in and edit them to make sure that they fit your business as well. So templates are really like a very terrible way of getting into compliance. And we also see templates that say, oh, I'm a GDPR compliant template. First of all, it's not. I've never seen a GDPR compliant template. And trust me, I've looked. It does not have all of the disclosures. Second, GDPR might not apply to you, or there might be 5 other privacy laws that apply to you that are not considered in that particular template. So that's why templates are a big issue. And when it comes to privacy policies, your policy needs to have all of the disclosures required by the laws that apply to you, or else you could open up yourself to fines, which can start at $2,500 per website visitor whose privacy rights you infringed upon. So that can add up very, very quickly for just not having a privacy policy or having one that's missing just one disclosure, so it's not compliant.
Yeah, a lot of people think, okay, I'm going to go get a GDPR template and I'll be good to go because GDPR is the most comprehensive. Yeah, it's the most intense privacy law out there. Personally, I would argue PIPETA, Canada's privacy law, is more intense, but that's just an opinion.
GDPR is the most enforced one.
The most enforced one, that's a good way to put it. But a lot of people don't realize that just because you have a GDPR template, if that's strictly what you have, then you're by definition almost non-compliant by both of California's privacy laws, CalOpen, CPRA, PIPETA, like all of them have their own different disclosures. So
which are different from the disclosures in GDPR.
Yeah. Right. So GDPR is more kind of like, and there's the umbrella of GDPR, but then you're going to have these like separate laws that are in different states that are not already inherently included in GDPR. So then you're missing out. Is that what you're saying?
GDPR protects the personal information of residents of the EU only.
Okay.
So when we're talking about like California's 2 privacy laws, it has no relation to GDPR at all. Those laws are intended to protect the data of California residents.
Right.
And Quebec's privacy law to protect Quebec residents. So if you're listening and you're Quebec, congrats, you have Quebec Bill 64 and Canada's
Yeah.
privacy law, PIPETA, protecting your data. So we're in Chicago. We only have biometric rights. So
yeah, it would have been really nice if when all of these laws were written, where somebody got together and said, all right, we're going to make these all the same so that it's easy to comply.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen because they're all created by different states, different countries, different governments. So they all have different requirements, but they all have similarities too. So, they define personal information in sort of a similar way. They all provide privacy rights to consumers. They all issue penalties for noncompliance, and they all require privacy policies. It's just the requirement for the disclosures that are within your privacy policy are different for each one. The privacy rights are different for each one, but the basic concept of we're here to protect consumers and their rights when they are doing business online or going online or providing their personal information to companies, that concept is the same.
Right. So I have a question. Like, let's say you've got a hyper local nonprofit who traditionally has only really seen, support from their region or their state. And so they, their privacy policy strictly only covers what they need in that area.
Yeah.
And then in this age of social media, let's say a campaign goes viral, someone picks it up, and then you have people from all over the state or the world, maybe even contributing. So is it best to kind of like future proof yourself in some ways to ensure that even if you maybe have never seen a supporter from California in your data before, like that you're protecting yourself just in case someone from California decides to donate to your, fundraiser?
Great question. Yeah. So, in general, I like to overdo things rather than underdo them personally. I'd rather make the disclosures in there because I know I'm not up to any shady practices with people's privacy. So I think when going that route, that mindset, it's just important to understand you may be exposing yourself to additional responsibilities that you have as an individual. So if you want to go above and beyond and provide the disclosures by other privacy laws that may not apply to you, just remember the fact that you may have responsibilities now as a website owner to do certain things, like, for example, collect people's consent prior to placing non-essential cookies on their browser with like a cookie pop-up or something like that. So, but yeah, overall, I would say that, like, from a very high level, I think that's a general good strategy.
Okay. And you mentioned cookies. So that's a really great segue into the next topic, which is actually other policies that should be in place. So we've talked a lot about privacy policies, but we also need to talk about things like cookies. So what are these? What needs to be considered? How should they be implemented? And then how does Termageddon help out with those?
Yeah, so cookies are little packets of data that get placed on your website visitors' browsers for analytical purposes, maybe for advertising purposes, or just for functional purposes or essential purposes. So, cookies are a great thing. I think a lot of people are thinking the words cookie means, okay, this website's selling my data or something, and that's not necessarily the case.
I have a great analogy for what cookies are.
Let's
and
hear
I'm
it.
sorry, I'm going to interrupt
That's
you.
all good.
But
Let's
I want
do
to
it.
share it because I thought of it like the
I haven't
other
heard
day.
this yet. I'm excited.
Yeah, I actually talked about it during another presentation that I was doing a couple of days ago. But so imagine that you're going to the grocery store and you're going to go and buy your regular groceries. And there's a person that is following you throughout the entire store and writing down everything that you buy. And they just, you're buying your bread and they write down what kind of bread you buy. You go get your eggs. If you're particularly rich at this time, they write down what kind of eggs you buy. And they don't say anything to you. They just write down everything that you buy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, most of us would be really, really creeped out by that, right? Like, who's this person writing down everything that I'm buying? That's kind of like a cookie, because a cookie goes on your device and it tracks you online. It sees what websites you're visiting. It knows what ads you're clicking on, and it knows what you're purchasing. A cookie consent mechanism is essentially the same scenario, except before that person starts following you, they come to you and they say, hey, I'm going to help you find your favorite type of bread. And if I help you find that, I'll even get a coupon. Is it okay if I go with you in the store? And then you'd be like, oh, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's not creepy or weird at all. So that's what a cookie consent mechanism does. It says, hey, can I follow you throughout your browsing and throughout your purchasing, and says, is that okay? Right? And then a consumer can make a choice, says, yes, that's fine, or no, that's not fine at all. So that's what a cookie consent banner is.
Yep. Yeah. And there's
I really like that analogy, but I do have one question about it. They do all that. We're still sticking with the grocery store analogy. Would cookies also get a time you walk in the store to know that you're going to have the bread that you picked out last, because it kind of continues to track and kind of serve you the same kind of content, or like cookies are also responsible for password remembering. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So safe to say you walk back in the grocery store and maybe you're already ready.
Yeah, and that's a great continuation. I would add just one little asterisk. So back in Donata's analogy, when this person came up to you and said, "Hey, can I follow you around?" When you consented, they may have also said, in 60 days, I will follow up with you and re-ask you again. So between now and 60 days from now, as you go through my store and pick out your breads and stuff, in 60 days, I'll re-ask you just to confirm you still like me to provide you this service. So that's a good way to do it. So, and it's important to understand not all privacy laws require consent of the use of non-essential cookies. In fact, it's just the GDPR, the e-privacy directive, and the United Kingdom's Data Protection Act.
And Pipetta.
Well, Pipetta requires you to collect the consent of collecting people's personal information. Well, you have to define the legal basis under which you collect personal information. And IP address is often collected when website visitors visit a website. And a consent mechanism like that is an excellent way to get consent prior to collecting their IP address.
Yes.
And then California. Yeah.
Cookie consent banners, you really only need them if you're collecting cookies that are not necessary to the operation of the website. So if those privacy laws apply to you and all you have on the website are cookies without which the website would break and people would not be able to use the website at all, you don't have to get consent for those. Really where we need consent is where any cookie that is not necessary to the operation of the website. So like Google Analytics, Facebook Pixel, LinkedIn Insight tags, sometimes reCAPTCHA, things like that. And what's really important to know about the cookie consent banner is that it needs to give consumers an actual choice. So all cookies must be disabled by default, except for the non-essential cookies. So those are the only ones that can be enabled by default. All the rest of them must be disabled by default and can only be enabled if a consumer consents to them being placed on their device. So that means that cookie consent banners need to have a yes and a no icon, or an accept and a decline icon. So the ones that you see that are all, we're using cookies, and by using this website, we're assuming you're cool with that, can't be used, or the ones that are like, click OK to proceed, and there's no option, those can't be used as well. So you need to have an accept and a deny option.
Yeah, there's been quite a few companies that have been fined tens of thousands of euros or even over $1 million for misleading cookie consent banners, or just simply non-working cookie consent banners. Yeah. And that's something that's very unfortunate with this industry right now, which is that a lot of people put these cookie pop-ups that just say, by visiting our website, you agree to us tracking you and doing all these things, and all you can click is okay. And the cookie banner doesn't do anything. And like, what's the point of that? Like, I get it that cookie banners could sometimes be a little invasive looking to website visitors. But the fact is, it's respecting people's privacy rights. It's giving them a choice on whether they want to allow you to track them or not. And I think that's something worth fighting for, not to mention it's, a legal requirement under several privacy laws.
Yeah, it's definitely a kind of least favorite thing when it comes to privacy laws. People tend to really dislike it. And some countries like the UK are considering going away with this requirement, but it is a requirement right now, unfortunately, and it kind of is what it is.
Well,
right?
and I'm a little optimistic about it. Really what these consent tools are giving website visitors the ability to do is make a decision like, hey, I'm going to get ads when I go to Facebook, when I go to, whatever, Twitter, wherever you're going, I'm going to get ads. When I visit these websites, I get to decide if I want to receive ads from them, for example. And I don't know, I think as time goes on, if the average consumer can pick that up and realize you get the choice on who has your data, who you share your data with, I think that's a great reason why I think these consent tools do exist. And it's a good reminder to those who may not be privy to them. So
yeah, and to your point, I think it's just really kind of funny that you mentioned that, because I was just talking to someone the other day who was complaining about ads they were getting on Instagram. And they're like, they just are bad and they are not relevant to me and I'm not interested and da da da. And I was like, well, did you opt out of tracking? And she was like, well, yeah. And I was like, well, that's why. Like, they don't know what you're doing and they can't use it to serve you ads. So
Yep.
you want good stuff. You're going to get ads no matter what. That didn't mean you weren't going to get ads. It just meant you're going to get worse ads.
Yes. Yeah.
I opted out of all the advertising and all the tracking on purpose, right? Because I'm a privacy lawyer, is what I do. And the ads that I get served are really, really funny because they are completely not anything that I'd be interested in. And most of them are centered around men's underwear. So that's fun. And it's very, very,
you said it.
They have very graphic descriptions, which I won't repeat, but it's so strange. Like I look at my Facebook feed and I'll just start laughing at these ads because they're so far off from anything that I buy. But it's great because that's what I want.
Yeah, that's how you want it. And that's perfectly fine. Like if you're okay with it, that's how you want it. Move on with your life, opt out of everything. But if it bothers you, to have to scroll through ads that don't align with what you would want, then turn your ad tracking back on.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And I'm a big ad. I love targeted ads. And I think that's surprising to people who see that we're in privacy, that like, oh, I would love targeted ads. Yeah, no, I appreciate ads that I'm actually interested in. In fact, I think that's a great thing. It's just what these privacy laws are doing is it's giving people the right to decide if they want to receive your ads or not. And that's a beautiful thing in my opinion. So
yeah, no, I totally agree. Okay, so I don't want to get too caught up in time, so we're going to move on to the next question, but I appreciate all of that. Super good information. So the next thing that I want to talk about is obtaining comprehensive policies for nonprofits. So for instance, as I think I mentioned to you previously, I'm starting a nonprofit from scratch. I'm a team of one. I have no legal expertise. I don't have a lawyer on my board. I can't afford a lawyer. I can do none of that, right? So I have no idea how to go about being compliant, or, I'm running with whatever the disclosure is that's just already built into my website, right? So how would I go about like obtaining a more comprehensive policy, and which I'm going to do after this conversation, without like necessarily knowing anything?
Yeah, so I'll talk about the first option and maybe Hans can talk about the second one.
Yeah.
So the first option is, if you can afford it, hiring an attorney. I would recommend speaking to an attorney who works in privacy. Very popular people who have the CIPP designation. So for example, I have that. I'm not accepting any clients, so don't worry. But that's a certified information privacy professional, certified by the International Association of Privacy Professionals. So that's IAPP.org, and they have a directory where you can search for attorneys in your area. A couple of things that I would ask an attorney before actually hiring them. So first, how much you charge. And as an attorney, trust me, that's not a rude question, and they need to answer that question. How do you write the privacy policy? So make sure that they know that privacy laws outside of your state or country can still apply to you. How much do you charge for updates? So privacy laws constantly updating. So this year, 6 new privacy laws going into effect. And that's mainly because in the US, we don't have a federal privacy law unless you're talking about healthcare, financial, or children's data. So you see more and more states passing these laws. So privacy policies will need to be updated continuously. So you should ask them how much they charge to keep your policy updated. And then, if they look at you kind of deer in the headlights, what do you mean update your policy? Probably go somewhere else. Yeah, but attorneys can be pretty expensive. So maybe Hans can talk about an alternative.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, attorneys, best route. I mean, because attorneys can provide legal advice, but if you don't have the type of funds laying around, which I obviously understand, and if you're not wanting to copy privacy policies from other websites, which I did before I ever met Donata.
That's a red flag Friday if I ever heard.
Hey, nice. You watched our video. Nice. But yeah, I would say maybe a second best option would be to consider a website policies generator. So, I mentioned earlier, term again, we are a generator. So we are obviously biased in our opinion, but a good generator will help you identify the laws that apply to you and will adapt the questionnaire and ask you the questions necessary to make the exact disclosures you're required to make, nothing more, nothing less. And what's nifty about generators in general is that you can get an embed code which you copy and paste into the body of your privacy policy page, the body of your cookie policy page, your terms of service page, and then the generator company will monitor these privacy laws, notify you of changes, and even push automatic updates with new disclosures to your policy pages as these laws change and new ones go into effect. So generators, the pro is it's pretty comprehensive and you can just do it pretty quickly. When compared to booking an attorney and waiting a couple months to get a turnaround. Also, it's significantly less in cost. So it's $99, like Termageddon is $99 a year for a full set of policies. And now you have not only comprehensive policies, but a strategy to keeping those policies up to date over time. But the con to generators are that they aren't legal service providers. So yes, Donata is the president of Termageddon. She's the chair of the American Bar's e-Privacy Committee. But that does not mean she's your legal service provider. In fact, we are not a legal service.
I'd be charging a lot more.
Yeah, we'd be charging like 10. If anyone wants to pay us 10 grand a year, we will listen.
I'm good. No thanks.
But yeah, so generators are a great alternative if you don't have the type of funds laying around. So the things I would recommend avoiding though are templates. And this is coming from someone who used to copy and paste them myself for my clients. Like just the fact is privacy laws are becoming more important, not less important. Enforcements are increasing, fines are increasing, and there's even bills being proposed that are going to enable consumers to sue website owners for collecting as little as an email address on a contact form without proper, New York privacy disclosures or whatever law passes. So yeah, those are the two options I would recommend considering.
Yeah, and I'd also say be careful with the policies that come templated from website builders. We see people use those, and a lot of them, it's a good effort that they bring the attention to the fact that you need a privacy policy.
That's great.
But a lot of them have just like headings and no text underneath. So you'll end up having to write all of it. And unless you know how to write it correctly, it will probably be not compliant. So be careful with those as well.
Yeah, I think templates are a great way to raise awareness of the importance of these legal obligations, but really just taking that extra time to really think about it and like make sure you're getting the disclosures in there that help you comply with laws and limit your liability.
That's perfect. So Hans, you alluded to copy and pasting policies in the past. You're an agency owner, so let's talk about agencies for a second. We talked a lot about like organizations and individuals, but how can agencies help educate and protect their clients with website policies?
Yeah, absolutely. So as a former web agency owner, I would get the question right before site launch, what should I do for my privacy policy? And I'd be like, well, I have no idea. I'm not an attorney, but web clients always think to ask their web person, just say, hey, what should I do? And that typically gets really awkward because the client asks you to copy and paste someone else's legal document from someone else's website over. And I cannot stress enough how I think that's a dying trend in this industry. I think web agency owners, in my opinion, have a responsibility to tell their clients, hey, look, I just installed this plugin or this form into your website that collects potentially regulated data. And I think you should get that acknowledged, that they understand that names and emails are regulated data. They now with their new website, they now may be responsible to comply with laws and to get documentation in place where you told your clients about this. So, for the record, at Termageddon, we give that away for free to our agency partners. In fact, I probably should just mention that, we Termageddon
questions, so definitely go for it.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, so we give web designers a free set of our policies forever for their own website. So they're willing to put in, in the hopes that they're willing to put in the time to generate comprehensive policies for their own website, and also in the hopes that you love our product and consider our reseller or our affiliate programs so you can help your clients get protected while making a little extra recurring revenue as well. So yes, we definitely have an agency partner program. A lot of Termageddon was built on both our law firm partner program and our agency partner program. Our DNA is really agency partnerships. So yeah, if you go to termageddon.com and click agency partners, you'll see how to apply to be a partner. Basically, you have to have a working web design services website. And if you don't, just inquire and mention how you watched us. But it's just for web designers who are trying to help out other clients. We provide all the assets and content you can provide your clients to help educate them on the potential legal requirements of their new website.
Perfect. Taylor, who is our moderator, she's off camera. She will drop that Go link for the agency partner page in the chat as well. So you should just be able to click it from there if you're curious. So that pretty much sums it up for the questions. I do want to just do quickly here. If you want to learn more about Termageddon, again, you can go to this link here. We'll also be dropped in the chat. But is there anything that the two of you kind of want to add to the discussion or cover that I didn't ask you about? Now's the time.
Yeah, so I think we got so involved in that cookie policy discussion that I just want to note there's also other policies like a terms and conditions, which is also known as a terms of service or just the word terms. So if you've ever heard the word terms and whatever, it all really means the same thing, and it just helps explain the rules to using the website. Nonprofits typically have a donation area where people can make donations and maybe even a commercial activity area. But if taking donations or payments of any kind, you definitely want a terms of service to help comply with consumer protection laws, help limit your liability as a website owner, and then just move on. So terms of service really helps your website visitors understand what happens when they make a donation or make a purchase through your website, and they don't, and it's not just that. Terms of service also has just fantastic disclosures that just help limit your liability as an individual just in general. So, and then a disclaimer is basically extra protections for people that specifically need to make disclaimers. So you've probably seen those Super Bowl commercials where you see a commercial for like a medical prescription, and in the final 10 seconds, it's someone talking like 100 miles an hour, disclaiming everything. That's what a disclaimer is. And websites that, offer affiliate links, provide health advice, fitness tips, legal advice, display ads from third-party sites, or sell health products. Any one of those would want to consider adding a disclaimer to further limit their liability as a website owner.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I wanted to touch on really quickly too, in one of the Go links, there's a link to our state privacy bill tracker that tracks all of the proposed privacy bills in the United States right now. So you can click on that and see that. I update that all the time. And one thing that I wanted to note is that all of the proposed bills would apply outside of the states in which they're passed. They would all provide consumer privacy rights, and then they would all require websites to have a privacy policy. Some of them do exempt smaller businesses or nonprofits, but not all of them.
Yep.
And then lastly, for enforcement, right now we're kind of in the world of fines, where if you're not compliant, you can get hit with a fine, $2,500 per website visitor at a minimum. But in the future, if any of these bills pass, they could allow consumers to sue businesses directly. So if you've been paying attention to what's been going on with ADA, once it was figured out that consumers can sue businesses directly, we kind of saw an explosion of lawsuits. So that's kind of what we expect to see here too, if any of these bills do pass.
So, and we don't mean to sound scary here. Like I assure everyone, as someone who had no idea about privacy and all this stuff, like, it's just like anything else. Once you kind of learn it, it kind of just dawns on you like, if I respect people's privacy and make the exact disclosures I'm required to make, I'm pretty much good to go. And that's a good, reminder to everyone that you get over this hump, you find your solution, and then you move on in life. And I think that's just a good reminder.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it definitely can feel overwhelming, but we also have some really great questions. So we're going to jump into those. If you have questions, please continue to add them to the chat and we will continue to answer them. In no particular order, I'm going to start asking questions. And the first one I'm going to go with is from PMP Pals, and they have a question about using the GiveWP privacy policy that we provide, which we did send over to you. Yeah, which we sent over to you prior. So I'm sure that you had a look at it. But their question is, if we're using GiveWP as our donor management software, is there a policy from them that we can use? Which, yes, there is. But is it too generic because each nonprofit is different and operates differently?
Yeah, so GiveWP, from what I understand at least, you're not a policy generator, right?
No.
So I think the document that's being provided is just being provided as a matter of courtesy to help customers. So first, we're talking specifically about the terms of service document provided by GiveWP to its customers. We're not talking about GiveWP's privacy policy or GiveWP's own terms of service. You should definitely not copy and paste those because those belong to GiveWP and that would be copyright infringement. The terms of service document provided by GiveWP to its customers, I think it's a great document for nonprofits to use in addition to a full terms of service. So a full terms of service will talk about, how to make a donation. Can you get a refund of your donation? What payment methods are accepted? Stuff like that. So you should have that on its own. And then in addition to that, you should have the GiveWP terms of service that they provide to their customers as a separate standalone document, because it talks more about taxes and ability to like deduct donations and things like that. Definitely make sure to review it, make sure it fits your business, put in your company name in there and all of your company information. But I would use that as a supplementary document to a terms of service.
Yeah, it's important. And I think it's also important to understand that terms of service is not a privacy policy. Is kind of simple in the sense that you figure out the laws that apply to you, you figure out the disclosures you're specifically required to make, boom, you provide them, you're good to go. I clapped really loud. I don't know if that was really like too loud for everyone there. But a terms of service is a little bit more open-ended because it's really just intended to help your users understand what are the rules to using the website. So it's not really possible for anyone to just have like, hey, this is it and you're good to go forever, because you could have infinity rules, like in theory, So so Donata worded it great. I just supplemented her thoughts with my own. So
great. Hopefully that answered your question. So they have another question though. So I didn't know that it could do this, but I'm going to do this now. You can show the question right here.
Nice.
So I believe the question is asking where you should display your privacy policies. So you're collecting at the bottom of some sort of page, or is it a dedicated nav on the website? What's the best recommended move for displaying privacy policies and other disclosures?
It's a great question. Great question. Yep.
There's really two places that we recommend having your privacy policy. So I guess, first of all, you should separate your privacy policy and terms of service documents. Most privacy laws say that they need to be under separate links because consumers cannot consent to both at the same time. So at the bottom of your website's footer, that's the first place where we see a privacy policy being displayed. It should be seen from every page that a visitor can visit on your website, and it has to be very clearly visible. So you have to make sure it's using contrasting text from the footer background to the text of the link. Maybe use different font or larger size font so people can very easily see it. You cannot hide it behind like a slightly less gray background and a slightly more gray text. It has to be very visible. The second place that we see privacy policies is at the bottom of any forms where personal information is being collected. So for example, an email subscription form, a contact form, an appointment booking form, donation forms, anything like that. Usually before a person can submit a form, there should be a checkbox. Do not pre-check the checkbox and leave it unchecked that says, I agree to this privacy policy or something similar, where the privacy policy is being linked so a consumer can read it. And then the consumer cannot submit their personal information until they consent to the privacy policy.
And a lot of, I feel I can already sense any marketers listening to this call are like, well, no, the more form fields you add to a form, the more people are going to not ever reach out to you. And I'm sitting here and I promise, at least from my experience, people either want to inquire or they don't. If you're adding an extra checkbox or two, unless you're processing like millions of forms every day and like,
well, then you definitely need it.
Well, yeah, you definitely need it then. Yeah, true. But that ruins my example here. But no, hypothetically, if you're processing millions of users, sure, maybe adding a agree to your privacy policy may reduce things by like 0.5% or something. I don't know. But I would feel like the vast majority of people watching this webinar are maybe processing less than 10 inquiries a day, maybe less than 50. I don't know. But anyways, respect you. If you really don't want to add more checkboxes, then you're going to have to just acknowledge that you might not be complying with respect to privacy laws, nor really the privacy rights of the individuals who are submitting their data to you. So just food for thought.
Yeah, on the Twitter website.
Yeah.
I think it's important to consider when you're talking about adding additional, I'm speaking as a marketer. I think it's really important to consider when you're adding additional fields or checkboxes, et cetera, to forms. And you get caught up in this idea that, I don't want to add too much because they don't want to give that much information. There's a really big difference between me having to give you my full home address when you don't need it versus me checking the box saying, yes, I consent to this, or thank you for sharing this disclosure with me, or whatever it is. At the end of the day, like, I would really rather know that my data is being protected, and especially in an age where that's like such a huge point of conversation for so many people, I would always recommend that maybe add that and may take away a field that you don't actually need to know about that person. So
That's
just something to consider from a marketing standpoint there.
Well,
but
And that's a practice of data minimalization when you're removing. I always say that minimization. There it is. I always say minimal. Anyways.
Marie Kondo your donation forms.
Exactly.
I fold my clothes per Marie Kondo's.
There you go.
So, but that's a great privacy practice, which is only collecting the personal information you absolutely need to do business with someone. So, yeah.
Yeah, if you're not sending, actual hard mail for your fundraising campaigns, you probably don't need to collect addresses. Okay, on to the next one. So this is a really interesting question from Gulf Coast IT Solutions. So it asks if a nonprofit that specializes in assisting cancer patients has privacy policies in place, but they also collect information from people requesting assistance. Would HIPAA apply?
So it would really depend on whether you are collecting protected health information and whether you're considered a covered provider under HIPAA. So it just depends on the information that you're collecting. So if I'm saying, okay, well, I collect names and emails and nothing else, probably not protected health information. But if I'm collecting, prescription histories or treatment plans or diagnoses, or what stage cancer are you in, things like that, then you might be running into HIPAA. But you definitely want to make sure that you are a covered provider under HIPAA as well, because there are certain exemptions there. So I think the best kind of course of action for a business like that, or for a nonprofit like that, would be to either speak to a HIPAA attorney or to look into HIPAA to see who it actually applies to, because it doesn't apply to everyone and it does not cover all kinds of data. It's just protected health information.
Right. So if it's a nonprofit that's assisting in just financial assistance to anyone that's undergoing cancer treatment, and all they're collecting is, name, email, that kind of thing, then you're just under, standard privacy policy. You need to make sure that you're doing that. But if they're required, let's just say that they're requiring that you submit a diagnosis of some sort to prove that you need financial assistance for cancer treatment, then that's where you're kind of bumping up against it and you need to do some other stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're saying, well, please specify what type of cancer you have, or specify what stage cancer you have, or what is your treatment plan, so we can know what financial assistance you need, or what medications are you on and how much do they cost, that goes into protected health information possibly.
Okay.
And for the record, I guess Termageddon, but hopefully other generators as well, allow you to customize your policies. So you can get your policies generated, and then you can have your attorney, like a HIPAA attorney, add in any additional disclosures regarding HIPAA if that were to be your situation.
Okay, excellent. Good to know. Okay, next question is from the Wisconsin Anti-Violence Effort. So they're asking about consent banner plugins. So if you have a consent banner plugin, which obviously you've installed on your site, does it, based on the answer, if the person says yes or no, I think they're asking, does it generally follow through with what that person clicks?
Okay, so that's a good one. That's right. So,
Sure.
Does it? So this is obviously a broad statement.
You stumble through this.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough one. It's a tough one because the plugin repository I love. Of course, I love the WordPress plugin repository. But when saying in general, are they working or not? My gut would be that they are not. Of course, there's many that do, but my gut would say that the vast majority do not. And I could be wrong. I'm guessing maybe like 60%, 40% would be my rough guess. I've never actually looked specifically at that, but what I can tell you is that you can test it. So what you can do is you can install this plugin, or you can use the one Termageddon provides. And once you install the cookie consent mechanism into your tool or into your website, do YouTube videos still load automatically? Do Google Maps load automatically? Are you still getting analytics results from Google Analytics, for example? Those are all examples of non-essential cookies. So if your plugin, if you click deny, you're still getting all those things loading and you're collecting all that data, that's a good indicator that that is not a working consent mechanism. So a working consent tool, and it doesn't have to be just a plugin. There's many web providers out there, but a working consent mechanism will actually, what's interesting is typically they actually control the scripts that would normally fire and then place cookies on your browser. So a cookie consent solution actually is more like a JavaScript or like a script consent or script management solution, in the sense that behind the scenes, these tools will start by just blocking everything that's not essential, and only after the user clicks accept all does it tell these scripts, okay, scripts, you're allowed to run now. And then the scripts fire and, share data with Google and, and
But
load up YouTube videos,
at
things like
that
that.
point, like once a user accepts the cookies, the information being collected by those cookies are collected by the cookies, not by the cookie consent mechanism.
Yes.
So if I have a Facebook pixel and I say, okay, Facebook pixel, you can track me, my, for example, IP address will be collected by Facebook, not by the cookie consent tool.
Yes.
That's the way I read that question. I don't know.
Hopefully that helps.
So I have another question here. And it's basically that small businesses or not organizations or even individuals would get fined, top of my head, but I did see a graphic from Termageddon that said something like in 2022, like 60 individuals were fined for non-compliance within privacy practices. It was a pretty significant jump over. So I know that we touched a little bit on that earlier in regards to like kind of, in the incoming pylon ADA. But in this moment, kind of what's the risk that people are running? The monetary fine. We know that.
Well, I would say that would be the risk is a financial risk, because that is the penalty for noncompliance. I think what typically makes the news is when Google gets fined billions of dollars, or YouTube or Facebook get fined for noncompliance, and that's what makes the news. What doesn't make the news are these smaller businesses that are getting fined, tens of thousands of euros out of GDPR enforcement in particular currently. And you can actually go to enforcementtracker.com and actually look through all the fines that have been tracked and reported on. And you're obviously going to see the big companies, but you're going to see small companies as well. And for those of you who are thinking like, oh, well, I'm too small, or I'm a nonprofit, so no one's going to, come after me. Obviously, I hope that's the case for you. I certainly hope you also take people's privacy rights into consideration when running a business and collecting personal information. I hope you're just naturally maybe wanting to shift your mind a little bit and think, how do I respect people's privacy rights? But I would say that it was there weren't many enforcements, but it is becoming more and more and more. And that's what you should keep an eye out, because more laws are passing and we're seeing increases in enforcements in existing laws, that it's probably a good idea to get ahead of this, get those disclosures in there, and then have that strategy to keep them up to date over time, and then move on respecting your website visitors' privacy. So that would be my thoughts.
I think also what a lot of people forget about is the consumer aspect of it. So consumers before, they weren't really concerned with privacy, right? Like we all used to go onto websites, share our personal information, and that was that. We never kind of thought about it twice. But ever since the Cambridge Analytica scandal, where Cambridge Analytica took the personal information of millions of Facebook users and used it without their permission for political ads, consumers have become a lot more interested in the privacy of their information online. And what's really interesting is that there have been multiple studies done on this, where the majority of consumers would switch to a different provider that provides more privacy rights and protections, would not provide their personal information to a company that they believe do not protect their privacy. And privacy is actually a purchasing decision now. So a lot of consumers will leave websites where they feel like they're being tracked without their permission, or where they don't know what's happening to their personal information. A lot of consumers will go onto a website and say, well, I don't know if they sell my personal information, but there's nothing on their website that says that they do, which means that they do. Versus if you have a privacy policy that says, no, we do not sell your personal information, then consumers are like, oh, great, because they don't have to kind of think about that thing in the closet, or under the bed. The answers are provided to them, so they feel comfortable and they feel respected, and then they can go in and make their purchase or make their donation, or sign up to a list, things like that. So those things are very, very important to consumers now too, maybe not all of them, but a large amount of them
It's
are
growing.
looking into privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so sorry, Camber. I just want to jump in with one more thought. I wanted to share this because I feel like this kind of helps unlock people's minds with privacy and stuff. So I think a lot of website owners think that they don't share data. In fact, maybe anyone listening right now, they're like, well, I don't share data. And I'll give you some examples where sharing data is actually quite common. So if someone were to submit an inquiry on your website's contact form, do you receive an email in your email inbox with that person's contact details? 9 times out of 10, I'd say yes. Most website owners receive that inquiry in their inbox. Well, that is an excellent example of sharing data with your email service provider, whether it's G Suite, Gmail, Hotmail, Outlook, AOL.com, whatever third-party email service provider you're using. If you're receiving that email with that person's contact details, your business has just shared data with that email service provider. So, and that is just one of probably about 6 or 7 examples where sharing data extremely common, and that is a disclosure requirement under several privacy laws. It's the selling data which is not as common, obviously.
I'd say it's almost impossible to have a website with any kind of form without sharing personal information. And I think that's where a lot of people get into trouble as well. You go into, I see this a lot, when you sign up for an email newsletter subscription, it says, don't worry, we won't share your data with anyone. And
except you're sharing it with ActiveCampaign or MailChimp or Substack or whoever you use to write your newsletter.
Exactly. Yeah. And when a consumer gets an email that's automated and they remember, oh, well, they said they didn't share my data, so they lied to me. I'm going to unsubscribe, or I'm not going to do this.
Report it as spam.
Exactly. Yeah. So just being open and transparent. That's where we see most consumer complaints come from, is when something happens to them online that they did not expect for them to happen to. Yeah. So they did not expect their personal information to be shared because they were told that it's not going to be shared. So they're upset, right? It makes sense. Or they weren't expecting to be tracked by Facebook pixels by default. They wanted to have a choice. So having that transparency, offering consumers that choice really goes a very, very long way towards preventing complaints from happening in the first place and from getting into trouble.
Yeah, well said.
Perfect. So we have one more question that I want to address in full. And then very quickly, there's a question that says that it asks if Termageddon auto updates on the website if it's pasted in. So we did cover that earlier, and Termageddon does auto update if you've got it pasted into your privacy policy page. So the last question is and it's not necessarily privacy policy related, but more data security. What is an adequate level of data security that a nonprofit may want to have to protect its donor data?
All right, so get 10 lawyers into a room and close us in there for 10 years and you will get 10 different answers. This one's really, really hard. But basically, the standard is reasonable and proportionate. And I know that doesn't mean anything to anyone, including the lawyers. But what you really want to do is you want to understand what kind of personal information you have. So if I have names and emails, I will apply a different level of security to that information than if I'm collecting social security numbers and biometric face prints, right? So first, it has to do with doing a data inventory and understanding what kind of data that you have. The second thing that I would do is if I was a business in this kind of shoes, is the Federal Trade Commission has really, really good resources for businesses on data security. So it all starts off with understanding what data you have, figuring out how you need to protect that data. So it goes anywhere from securing your computer. So for example, if you keep data on a USB stick, don't do that, or don't leave your laptop in an unlocked car. To training employees on phishing and other types of scams.
Phishing attacks, not phishing.
Yeah, sorry, phishing, PH.
Yes.
So that one's really, really important because most security threats come from the inside, where somebody clicks on a link or a vendor sends an email asking you to pay them in a different bank account, and you just pay them without calling them, and it turns out that was a scammer. Things like that. So training employees, making sure you have antivirus software, that you have an SSL certificate on your site, making sure that you don't have any shady plugins on your site, make sure that you update those plugins for security, things like that. But I would really recommend, since we're short on time, I'd recommend checking out the Federal Trade Commission, ftc.gov. And it has a lot of resources for businesses about how to secure data, including webinars so you can share with your employees, different examples of security threats and things like that, and how to resolve security threats and how to prevent them from happening in the first place.
All right. Wow, we ended really close to right on time.
Not bad for
Shocking,
privacy.
Yeah.
Not bad for such an important and like nuanced topic.
No.
There's just so much, there's just,
It
so nuanced, and there's, like just everything applies differently to people. So I feel like we could probably have another hour and still have plenty to talk about. So,
yeah, you can talk about this for years and years and years, I think, as I've been doing.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody's sick of me by now.
I'm sure everyone listening right now would love to do a couple more hours, right?
100%. Well, we are going to wrap up. You will be able to check out Termageddon at termageddon.com. You'll find that in the show link replies underneath. And that's about it for us. So I really appreciate it, you guys.
Thank you, Camber.
Thank you for having us. This is really
Of course.
great.
For anyone listening, Camber's been awesome to work with for everyone, anyone listening. So,
Matt, are you listening? All right. Well, we are going to end here, and I will see you guys on the other side.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Camber.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.